Sorry, my mic was on mute. Can I be heard?
Yes. Yes.
Good morning.
About to start in a minute.
Okay, fine. I'm here. I've started.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Very good morning, all of you. On behalf of T Training Finance and Office of CGCA, I welcome our guest of honor, Member Finance, Department of Telecom, Shri P.K. Sinha, Advisor Finance, Department of Telecom, Shri Dilip Padhe, Additional CGCA, Shri G. Kitchen, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Archana Golgolati, Professor Bulbul Dhar James. I welcome all my seniors and my colleagues. I'm extremely delighted on the overwhelming response which DOT Training Finance and CGCA got from all the participants from today's webinar. Before we start, I would request all the participants to mute their applications so that there is no voice interference. Also, when the presentations will be made, I would request most of the participants to mute their videos as well. So before we start, can everybody just put the videos on so we can take some group pictures of the participants? I'll just request all to put the videos on. Thank you. Thank you so much. I will start the webinar with a quote. This is by Emma Watson. She is a British actor. In her UN speech in 2014, Emma Watson said, "Both men and women should feel free to be sensitive. Both men and women should feel free to be strong. It is time that we all perceive gender on a spectrum instead of two sets of opposing ideas." With this quote, I request our guest of honor, Member Finance, Department of Telecom and CGCA, Shri P.K. Sinha, for his inaugural address on our webinar on gender sensitization, deconstructing gender stereotypes. I request Sinha, sir.
Good morning to all of you. I think I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, you are. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Respected Dr. Bulbul Dhar James, my colleague, Additional CGCA, Mr. Chin, Archana Gulati, and lot of our friends over there. I give all of you a very, very warm welcome to this webinar. I don't know whether I'm qualified enough for this webinar or not, because it is something, it is calling out gender sensitizations. deconstructing gender stereotyping. I don't know, when we were taught management, there is a concept of Johari window. How much of prejudices, biases, stereotyping, what I might have been doing, I also don't know. But anyway, if at all we have to discuss, deconstruct, to demystify, let us start. I may not be a qualified person or to speak on this, and I will expect from our esteemed speakers to make all of you aware about the whole concept. To me, it appears to be a complex issue. It may be related to socio-economic situations, maybe cultural, maybe political. That's why people are also talking in terms of empowerment, equity issues, human rights issues. Big issues are coming and getting involved in this very small. I think, to me, it is very, very complex issue. And human minds, they hate. At least human minds, at least my mind hate complex issues. I am not for anything which is very, very complex. And therefore, I will just, limit my, I would say, whatever I can, do justice on this topic. I'm not going to give you a glimpse of what used to happen in Vedic call on this today. I am also not going to give a talk about, say, Maitre, Gargi, others, illustrious women. I am also not going to invoke.
There is some interference. Please close all your.
I think is it okay? I am also not going to invoke Manu Smriti. Jat Nari Pujanti Tantra Gusante Devta. God lives where women are revered. These are all things, this all true. I'm also not invoking, the power of Shakti, Lord, these goddesses, others, nothing. All this you might be getting a glimpse. Therefore, when you just find about women sensitizations, not many people, talking about women discriminations, loss of opportunities, unequal opportunities, lot of these things. And many of these things have political connotations, social connotations, and cultural connotations. People are talking about Siksha, Swasth, education, health, Swalamban, self-reliance, and Samajik Nyaya, that is social justice. All these things are being put together. I don't know. And I'm not qualified to speak on any of these things. What I will limit myself, the Bible says that God made man in his imaginations. And alternatively and consummately, what man has done? Man has also formed and made a lot of images in his mind. So lot of biases, prejudices, stereotypings, whatever we are saying, it is our own creation. It is creations of our mind, our social conditioning, our thinking, and every of those kind of things. And we all suffer from these biases. I think among all the Homo erectus, we Homo sapiens have survived for one reason. We can tell stories, we can create stories, we can imagine, and we can also impute something into some images, something into some maybe false things, an image of reality. And this is what in nutshell, is what I call stereotyping. Maybe when you have a boy, there's a brilliant boy, and girl will always be beautiful. That sort of things always happen. We all suffer. We don't know, and these are all unconscious. And that is far more dangerous. When we are conscious about ourselves, then, some remedy could have been resolved, could have come. But the problem is, we are also not conscious about what is inside. In mythology, there is a story. After creating man, Brahma wanted to meet him. So he called man. And Brahma gave man two bundles. One bundle of, say, virtues, goodness, other bundle of vices and bad things. And warned man that whatever you have, virtues bundle should be behind you and vices bundle should be before you. Unfortunately, what happened when man turned, it became topsy-turvy. That means all of us have, virtues bundle, good bundle in front of us and bad bundle beside us. So whatever we are looking good unto ourselves. And others, whatever they are looking into us, they are looking only bad things. Or maybe things they don't want to tell. And this is what we have to be warned of. And this did not. Why we have done? Personally, I do believe that we all suffer from prejudices, we all suffer from biases, but these biases are learned. These biases can be corrected and it can be counteracted upon. And I think today lectures, will make us aware about our, frailties, our biases, prejudices, so that it will create good environment. Limited purpose is, we want to have some sort of good environment, working environment, egalitarian environment to work among ourselves. This is what is required. Before I just proceed, I will also, about the biases, prejudices. I will tell you one story. I remember I have read a lot about Mullah Nasruddin. So whenever I speak on any topic, he comes in my mind. I don't know why. Mullah Nasruddin was just, gossiping, chit-chatting among his friends. If at all this group could have been women, we would have said they are gossiping. But because they are men, the group of men, we call them, they were discussing and not gossiping. So he was discussing why he has not married. Mullah Nasruddin was explaining, once he got a beautiful woman in Cairo. She was beautiful, but she was not brilliant. The other day he had been to other places. There also he got a woman who happened to be brilliant, very brilliant, as well as beautiful, but she was unkind. Last, he saw a woman who happened to be brilliant, beautiful, kind, and a perfect woman. Then his friend asked him, if at all you got a perfect woman, why didn't you marry him? Mullah Nasruddin told, that is the greatest tragedy of my life. It seemed she also wanted a perfect man. My friends, we are not perfect. We are all, that's why let us not talk about all these things. I will just talk about only two things. Not Siksha, you say the Swalamban, this and that. I will talk what in Hindi, what we call Samvedana. And Samvedana has its sensitivity. And the other thing is Samta, equality. You see, let us not treat our other gender with reverence. We don't want reverence. We want a treatment of equality. This is what is all about. I would say if at all we are able to treat the other gender equally without much of reverence, much of respect, that will do. If at all one is searching for perfect woman, then the woman will also be searching perfect man. This is what about knowing our own prejudices. And nothing else. And not about all these, this a start. Why this kind of start only with us? In Hindi, what we feel, apna haath Jagannath. God is in your hand. And charity begins at home. Whatever we have to do, let us do ourselves. Let us try from today to be more aware about ourselves, to be more, self-introspecting about biases, prejudices, and trust. I think there can be no other way of knowing your prejudices than from others, good friends, and from self-introspections. This is what is required as a persons. Not talking about the whole thing. We just want to do whatever little we can do. बोलते हैं आप बदलो जग बदले. If at all you change, the world will change. This is what I wanted to just tell about it, and I won't be taking much of your time because you have to listen to others also. Once again, I welcome all of you and thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. Thank you for hearing. Whatever I could, I am not qualified, but whatever I, went into my little head, I was spoken. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Rightly said by you that change starts from within and imperfection is perfection. So we all will strive to initiate a wave of change in society and amongst us, which promotes a life of dignity and equal rights for all, while accepting each other's faults, as you said, imperfections. Before we start, I would request all of you to please mute your audio. And I will start with the first speaker, Ma'am, Dr. Archana Golgolati. Before asking Ma'am to present her views, I would also welcome Shri G. Kitchen, additional CGCA. Most welcome, sir. And we are very thankful for CGCA to organize and collaborate with us. Thank you, sir. Also, if any of you have any questions, there is a chat option in the app. So please put your questions in the chat option after Madam's presentation is over, or you can raise your hands and we will just let you in. Dr. Archana Golgolati, as you all know, she is our senior colleague. She's from 89 batch of Indian IP&T AFS service with 3 decades of experience in the field of telecommunications, policy and regulation. She has degrees in economics, management, law and public administration, and a PhD from IIT Delhi. Ma'am is a telecom policy expert, as we all are aware of, with specializations in competition and universal service. At present, Ma'am Archana Golgolati is posted as Joint Secretary Digital Communication at Niti Aayog. Ma'am has also authored various articles, papers, books, chapters on diverse subjects such as telecom and competition regulation, e-government, universal service ICTs for women with disabilities, bureaucratic reforms, disaster management, etc. Dr. Gulati, I would request you to present your views.
Thank you, Aprajita. Let me just share the presentation. I hope you can see the presentation and hear me clearly.
Yes.
Okay. Respected Member Finance, Mr. P.K. Sinha, Advisor Finance, Mr. Padi, Additional CGCA, Mr. Chin, my esteemed fellow panelist, Dr. Bulbul Dhar James, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to speak at this event and delighted to be amongst my colleagues, even if it is virtually. I'm not an expert on gender issues, and I'm sure it is Dr. James who is going to enlighten us, really. All I can do is share my experience and my perspective and hope that I can encourage my fellow officers to create workplaces that value and support both men and women equally. My topic is women at work, leading versus merely blending in. Let us first see why this is important at all. As you can see from the slide, women are clearly not well represented either in the labor force or at a leadership level in the national parliament. While science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are seen as the most important topics for the future, what we see is that women represent a very small percentage of this workforce. They also seem to drop out from the workforce even after studying these subjects. Research suggests that not only would greater female participation in the workforce improve GDP, it would improve welfare, because Indian women contribute a larger percentage of their earning to the family than do Indian men. So what happens at work? Let's look at stereotypes first. If it is absurd to classify complex human beings who have so many different traits into any kind of broad category, I mean, can we say that all the people who are born in a particular month of the year are all same? Then any kind of classification is ridiculous. But these kind of classifications do happen, and when they happen, they actually harm. Let me share some of my own experiences with you. So this is 1993. I was posted in a small cantonment town. My army officer husband was often away in exercises, in camps, in trainings, and I had just joined office back after my maternity leave. In those days, maternity leave was only 3 months, and there was no such thing as childcare leave. But I was very fortunate. My workplace was only about 10 minutes away from my home, at least by car, and I used to drive every day in my Maruti, which I would park in exactly the same spot at office every day. It was easy to go home for lunch to look up my daughter, and my boss, the general manager of finance, was kind. Once in a while, if I had to rush home due to some sort of emergency at home, I would inform him and I would go. I was doing well at work, everything was fine. One day I received a call from the office of the chief general manager, and it was a strange call because they asked me, "Are you in office?" Of course I was in office. I was answering on the office landline. Well, I was informed that the CGM was looking for me and that I should come. So I went to the CGM's office. When I went there, he was accompanied by a certain gentleman, let me call him Mr. X. Mr. X was known to have the ear of the CGM, but Mr. X had nothing to do with my work. The CGM inquired about my work, and I was very conscious of a general disapproving manner in which I was being spoken to. He asked me, that you must complete some random task on time, and he told me to pay attention to my work. I must say that this conversation upset me. I was quite baffled too. So I went and reported this to my immediate boss, the general manager of finance, and he too was quite surprised. After a few days, the general manager of finance told me what was going on. It seems that Mr. X had an office which had an excellent view of the parking lot. Now, Mr. X would note every time that I was away from the office because he would see that the car is missing. Mr. X decided that I was a slacker. On one particular day, when the car was not there, he checked whether I was on leave, and he found that I was not on leave, and he informed the CGM that I don't attend office regularly. The rest you know. Well, as it happens, that was a day where my husband had dropped me to office. Now, this sounds like a very trivial incident, perhaps, but it had an impact on me. Because now, even today, when anybody asks me, "Are you in office?" what I hear is this: not committed, not serious, slacking off. But the lesson that I learned was, don't speak about your family compulsions, underplay them to the extent possible. Fine. Now, many of you have heard of this project, Sanchar Shakti. This is a Universal Service Obligation Fund project. I had been working on it for months, and finally it was ready to be launched. I had managed to convince the Office of the President of India that it was a fit project for her to launch. I was simultaneously working on two things. One was a film for the launch, and one was the book, the coffee table book for Sanchar Shakti. But then, just then, what happened was that my daughter, who was now in college, flew back home with chickenpox. I was torn between looking after her and the lesson that I had learned. Never speak about office compulsions. It was tough. I managed, she managed. But I think that the state of mind that I was in at that time has something to do with the cover design of Sanchar Shakti. Let's fast forward to 2015. Now I am the boss. A male colleague of mine has not turned up for work. I call him up and I ask him where he is. He tells me very confidently, "Madam, I'm not coming to work today. My kid is feeling cranky." I said, "Okay," and I put the phone down, but I was sort of shocked and I examined my own feelings. What were they? Resentment? Astonishment? And then I told myself, okay, why not? Maybe it's a better place, a world now. Things have changed. Maybe it's okay to talk about family compulsions. But, I have a sneaking suspicion that that's not true. I don't think, and I'm not sure whether a woman can still get away with the same comment. I believe that we have different standards for men and women. And I think that if a woman was to say that, it would somewhere harm her career. We seem to have different standards. The stay-at-home dad is very nice. He's a dear. But the stay-at-home working, or the working mom is probably not working at all. And she's on top of that a bad mom. So what happens? Men and women start the career marathon equals. Women are equally good in terms of academic performance. But then somewhere along the way, all kinds of labels and pressures make her question her progress. And she wonders whether it's worth it. On the other hand, he is celebrated and sort of cheered every step of the way. That it's a man's world at the workplace is an open secret. I was equally amused and equally saddened when I read recently in a book that I was reading, this advice from one firewoman to another. Cut off your hair, don't laugh, don't use the upper register of your voice, work twice as hard, outdo all the men in your team to prove that your half is good. Well, very funny, but unfortunately, I have given similar advice to younger female colleagues. It seems that we are forced to blend in before we can lead. Let's talk about leadership. This one's an even worse balancing act. It seems that women are required to achieve the impossible. Look at this advice that I got from a fellow civil servant. To be able to lead, we should be bold, decisive, and outspoken. But we should be careful that we don't project ourselves as arrogant or obstinate. It seems that, for women to be competent, we must also be likable. Unfortunately, we are required to be perceived as nice. And unfortunately, competent and assertive women are often not perceived as nice. So what holds women back is a combination of outside influences and internal conditioning. Let's look at how gender bias works. I'm going to share a very small video with you.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for their daily races, going nowhere, and their tears are filling up their glasses, no expression, no expression. Mad world, mad world.
So this is a shampoo ad, and I'm not going to apologize because nobody's ever apologized to me for using a sports or a cricket metaphor. So what happens with women is that we operate in a world where the rules are made by men and for men. It's no wonder that we are racked with self-doubt. We're afraid to speak up. We're afraid to enjoy our success. And we are afraid to take on fresh challenges. I'm sure that these emotions ring a bell, even with the most successful of women's. We have so many fears of not being liked, not succeeding, not having the necessary skills. We actually are afraid to be ambitious, afraid to take on leadership positions, afraid to take career-related risks. However, what happens with us is every opportunity that we forgo only adds to these fears. And then we are sort of lost in the career marathon. My advice to my female colleagues is grab every opportunity. Don't be afraid. Handle those fears, overcome those fears. And all this can change. What we require is sufficient support and encouragement from so many different actors, our parents, our spouses, our teachers. And at the workplace, bosses and mentors become extremely important. I would say that I myself have benefited greatly from such support. After all, human beings, as we said, are extremely complex. And there is no leadership style which is exclusive, sort of privilege of any particular man or a woman or any particular gender. What actually, like, I would like to give you another example. I was posted in the Northeast. This is Dimapur, and at that time there was a lot of insurgency. I had to set up a finance office in the Northeast 2 circle in Dimapur, and I needed some records from Shillong, which is the Northeast 1 circle. And those records were simply not coming, and I wasn't able to set up the office. So what did I do? I got into an ordinary civilian vehicle. I had a small child, so I took her along. I drove all the way from Dimapur to Shillong. I got those records and I brought them back and I set up the office. Now, this was an office which was an all-male office. All the officers lived inside the same building with CRPF protection. I was the only one who used to commute every day to office in a normal vehicle without any escort. And, it used to get dark very early in the Northeast. And the chief general manager, who was a nice man, would often be afraid. And one day it was stormy. I remember it was very stormy outside. It was pitch dark. It was 5:30 in the evening. And he rang me up and he was worried. And I remember consoling him the same way that I spoke to my child. Don't worry, sir. Everything is all right. Everything will be all right. So these are different leadership styles and they work. What better test of leadership can you have than the crisis that we are going through right now, the pandemic? And women have proved their worth. My last bit of advice to my female colleagues in particular is speak up and ensure that you're heard. To all my colleagues, I would say that if you want to succeed as a leader, encourage the women in your team to speak up and the men to listen and respect the diversity of opinions. This is the way you'll get the best out of every colleague. What we need to do is this. And women need to speak up too. What we need is a human workplace. One where everybody gets their dues. That's all I have to say and share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Golgolati, for sharing your experiences with us for this amazing, powerful presentation. Lady officers would not even like to discuss the issues which you have discussed publicly. Somehow officers and the offices, they push gender sensitization under the table. They all know what is happening, but nobody wants to discuss the issues. While organizing this webinar, I had the opportunity to discuss the details of this webinar with the senior most lady officer in this ministry. And the problems which you shared and the experiences which you shared, even she had faced similar experiences. Not only she, I believe most of the ladies, they have faced. But everybody wants to push this issue under the table. I thank you so much, ma'am. Any questions? Anybody has any questions? I think I have. Ma'am, I would like to ask you, there is a question for you. Do you think things are better for women at work now?
Yeah, Prajita, you can hear me, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I do think things are much better now. For one thing, we have, we've taken we have recognized the compulsions of women. We have much longer maternity leave. We have something called paternity leave. We have childcare leave. I think men have also progressed a lot. And I would say that the most interesting thing that I've noted is the pandemic actually brought out a concept of work from home, where, you are more driven by output than by your physical presence at work. And it's very often something that I have noticed, that long hours in the workplace are equated with doing well, which is not necessarily a fact. Therefore, I think, yeah, things have improved. That's it.
Thank you, ma'am. There is one more question for you. What workplace issues would you like to change? I'll repeat, what workplace issues would you like to change?
Oh, well, Prajita, as I said earlier, one of the things is I don't think we should equate long hours sitting in office with, great and brilliant performance. we should be more outcome driven. In fact, I had a great a boss who was a great female leader, and she would make it a point every day. Though we had a situation where we did work long hours, she would make it a point every day in the evening, no matter how busy she was, to pick up the phone and tell me, "I don't need you anymore, Archana. Please go home." That was really something very remarkable. The second thing is, I don't know if anybody's noticed, the workplaces are not even physically designed for women. I mean, a computer mouse is actually too big for a woman's hand. The chairs, the tables, nothing in the workplace is probably designed keeping women in mind. And we're just talking about desk work. God knows how many other workplaces need to change on this account. So yeah, so those are the things that I would like to see change.
I'd also like to add that I really enjoyed that experience sharing that you did, because, and you've picked up so many points that I would like to take on. And because it's an experience that you've had, and this is in the government, the private sector is perhaps ostensibly more gender neutral, but our language is also so gendered, there's no concept of recognizing that. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. James. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Archana Golgolati ma'am. Also, there are a lot of requests for sharing the PPTs. I would like to remind all that this webinar is also available it is coming live in CGCA's YouTube channel. And it can be, if somebody wants to relook into it, it is available there, and we will definitely share the PPTs if ma'am will allow with the officers. Thank you, ma'am. Now I would request Professor Dr. Bulbul Dhar James, our key speaker, to touch upon the topic of today's webinar. Dr. Dhar is coordinator, MA Human Rights Program, and professor in the Political Science Department at Jamia Millia Islamia. She is former director, Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies, Jamia Millia. She has many publications on human rights and gender empowerment, and is also involved in capacity building and training. I would request Dr. Bulbul Dhar James to kindly go ahead with her presentation. Not audible.
Sorry, I didn't realize my mic was on mute. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I'm honored to have such esteemed participants, panel of participants on the forum. And I think it started off on an amazing note right from the beginning, when the gentleman spoke about so many issues and he's already identified them. So I'm just going to pick them up slowly. And this is not something that we don't know. What really struck a chord with me was the fact that he said we do this unconsciously. And that is what we need to bring. My purpose and our purpose in a webinar like a workshop is to make that kind of cognitive dissonance something which we need to change in various ways, instead of it being unconsciously doing it, constantly. So I'll just upload my presentation. Is that visible? Is the presentation visible?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm really looking at deconstructing gender stereotyping. Part of it, Archana picked up huge amounts of what I would like to take up. But something I want to emphasize is that we need to look beyond women as well. And we also need to understand how men are actually disadvantaged through this whole insensitive attitude ourselves. So it's not a men and versus women kind of a thing. So as I said, the purpose of this webinar for me is experiencing cognitive dissonance, experiencing it. So we, kind of look at it, reflect self-critically on what we do, unconsciously, subconsciously, half consciously in the attitudes in which we behave with our girls and boys. And the idea behind it being practicing new habits. So wherever we are, at whatever scenario, home, work, whatever environment that we are speaking about, we need to do that. Somewhere along the line, we need to first understand, the first thing we need to know about gender is that gender is not the same as sex. It is not. It's often taken to be the same. It is not. Despite the fact that the Constitution of India guarantees all kinds of equalities, it is culture and society which defines our space and boundaries. We as men, women, and further when I deal with it, trans people, operate in these spaces and boundaries. So it's like the Honorable Prime Minister spoke about the Lakshman Rekha, the Lakshman Rekhas within which we all operate. That is culture and society determined, subculture, sub-society determined as well. It also, culture and society, despite having this constitutional and legal backdrop behind it, and as Archana said, now you have paternity leave and stuff like that, yet if mindsets don't change, it's not going to make a difference in how we are operating in this larger scenario. So within that culture and society, deciding the space and boundaries as well as code of conduct and roles we play. So male roles versus female roles, kind of conduct we need to have. And I think Archana dealt with this really well in terms of whether it's neat versus vain, or she spoke about aggressive, pushy from one angle, if the woman is presenting herself in a similar way as a man is as well. I would also like to emphasize the notion of guilt that women have constantly, because of which they don't take up a lot of things. And, the fear, as she said, the fear keeps rising over a period of time. So we are looking at culture and society, providing opportunities and challenges for societies to unfold in new directions as well. This is there in a larger sense. If I can't be heard, please do let me know. Or if you can't see the presentation, because I can only see the presentation, I can't see anybody else on the screen. Aparajita?
No, sir.
It's visible.
Fine, thank you.
So the bottom of this thing is patriarchy. I mean, I want to deconstruct patriarchy because patriarchy, which is a form of social organization in which man heads and controls the family unit. The man also heads large social groups and working groups as well as government. So when I was starting this, when I was, talking to Aparajita about the gender, the ratio of men versus women, she told me it was less than 10% of women in your workforce there as well. So that's something which is typical in a sense of any working groups that we are looking at. So we are looking at men predominating. Having said that, patriarchy by itself is not male domination. And that's something I can't emphasize enough, because very often it's misunderstood to be male domination. It is domination of male values in society. It is a society in which family or society in which authority is vested in the male, through whom descent or inheritance is traced or was traced. Legally, that's also changed. Now, women have property rights. They also can be the karta of the family legally when we are looking at that. So, that has changed, but the larger complexion remains the male values which predominate in the larger scenario of things. So we are looking at patriarchy when we look at the notion of, the larger notion of how patriarchy controls. I want to first just focus on women, and it influences on women of patriarchy at large are something which is control over her body, over her mobility. Mobility is often taken to be something which is, I have a slide missing here. Otherwise, there was a slide on this as well. So we have patriarchy, which is controlling the wealth and property of women as well. So when in refresher courses, with a show of hands, I ask the women in the group who are teaching faculty across India, that if you were to file a case against your father, brother, or whatever for property, how many of you would do? With great difficulty, one odd hand goes up. So I don't even have 1% actually taking it up. What I'm trying to say is the legality aside, unless things change, because relationships are important for women and men as well in various ways. Health is another casualty that patriarchal control does for women, where, in the Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, health has been a major issue that has had to be looked at. Education and employment, and I just spoke about the proportion of women in the Department of Telecommunications, Government of India. So you have, despite the educational level being high, despite them reaching certain positions in terms of academic performance, yet that is not sustained in the show of the women who are there at work. Employment is become an issue as well. And if I'm taking, and now it's become worse in a lot of ways, if I'm taking a session on Sexual Harassment Act, which is a mandatory thing according to law, and if I'm taking it with corporates, at the end of the session, when you explain that, this is what harassment is, at the end of the session, most of them come up and say, that is the reason that we shouldn't have, the only solution is not to have women at the workplace, then we won't have a problem. So I'd like to say the reverse also is possible, which is not having the men, but that's not the idea. It's not a men versus women thing. We really need to look at it beyond that. And something which struck a chord with me was by men, for men, which I think Archana spoke about. And it's really Indira Jaising, who's drafted the Domestic Violence Act, who's a lawyer. One of the titles of her book is called Women's Lives and Men's Laws. So unless you have women in participation and decision-making bodies, the laws cannot change, cannot be sensitized to women. So it's important to have them there. But the most debilitating thing where women are concerned, where patriarchy is concerned, is autonomy and self-esteem. The kind of challenge it is for the woman herself to her own self-esteem when she's questioned, like Archana was questioned, did you come to work today? And that is, something that one is constantly facing, and you have to have your antenna up and be on your guard. And if I see Archana and I know her name, and she's driving, she's across the signal light from me, and I'm in a car here, and she just breaks the red light and crosses over, perhaps even I would say at that point, all women drive the car badly. I'm not going to say these are the kind of stereotyping that we grew up with, that we constantly do. And what's at the bottom of this stereotyping is this dichotomy between sex and gender. Sex, which is biologically determined, or was till technology got in a difference, but we'll go by the universal. The fact that it is universal, it is given and it's unchanging. So that is something that's a given. You can have sex change operations, but we're going by the normal in that sense of the term. The other side is, of course, gender, which we are creating. The problem is not in the sex. The problem is in gendering, or the gender that we as mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, society, bosses, mentors, parents, teachers, all of whom, the support that Archana spoke about needs to be sought. All of us construct that. With complex cultural elements go into its construction. As I said, culture would define, and cultures of different places would have different notions of what gender should be, how women should behave, how men should behave. And I want to emphasize how men should behave as well, because that's an issue I want to pick up. Very often it's treated like a women's issue. It's not. It's more than that. So problem is that gender is acquired. We are not born with it. It varies within culture and in different cultures. So we are looking at differences within that larger scenario. So what's the notion here? So we have a popular hero in one of his films says, "Pyar se de rahe hain, rakh lo, warna thappad maar ke bhi de sakte hain." So the notion of entitlement that is there, simply, and this is a show of love ostensibly, is something that brings in a whole lot of other notions that we want to look at. I'm also going to I'm taking up some of the media issues because this might resonate, because we take it, we watch it, we imbibe it and continue with our life. We don't seek to make that difference, and that's something we need to do. Going on from this notion of thappad to Thappad, another film that I recently saw on Netflix, is about Tapasi Panu, who's a stay-at-home wife, whose feelings for her husband turn from devotion, practically devotion, to indifference when he gives her that one thappad one day. So it's a traditional couple, for those who haven't seen it. He has a busy career. She makes his dreams her own. She can't even cook, but she tries to do that. While he labors over office assignments, she labors over his every need, serving him meals, chasing up to him to the car with his wallet, with his beverage, coffee in hand, while feeding him his unfinished breakfast, caring for his elderly mother, maintaining the house, entertaining guests. All that is part of the first scene that we are met with. What do I see in this film is deconstruction of patriarchy through the protagonist, which is this Amu, Tapasi Panu Aka Amu, whose dramatic inner journey and chronicles how it impacts everybody else in her life. Her father, mother, others react to that as well. Ratna Pathak Shah, who's the mother, who's a conflicting mother. She wants to stand by her daughter, but she says, "Ek thappad bardasht karna padta hai." Tanvi, or anything, that bardasht karna, notion of gendering of woman having to bardasht karo is something which is constantly reiterated. Tanvi Azmi as a silent suffering mother-in-law who sees that, wants to say something, but only says that in the end. The housemaid who sees something happening here, which she thought was a class thing, which is getting bashed up by her husband, which she's every day done, but she doesn't let that come under. So you have there as well. Or the sister-in-law, who's would-be sister-in-law, who's fiery and she's spirited and she's, kind of stands up and says, "No, you can't take this." And then her lawyer who says, "How can you file a case against your husband for a slap?" And then her own life, she tries to seize back and says that so many things I'm compromising on under the name of, maintaining this facade of what is a happy family or whatever. So various shades of, in this we see various shades of men as well. So that's the women. The men, it's interesting. The husband is very kind to the house help. He'll tell her very politely, but orders his wife around. And this is, he's not an abnormal person. He's a very nice person. They have a very normal relationship. He does this, as Sir said right in the beginning, unconsciously, subconsciously. It is something that he's been brought up with. He doesn't have horns on his head, but he's just another entitled jerk who's blinded by his male privilege. So the notion of the male privilege constantly keeps knocking on us. Thappad also kind of, Spotify's various kinds of men there, haughty, entitled hero, and more likable persons like her father, who interestingly is a feminist where his daughter is concerned. He doesn't like it, this is happening to his daughter, but unconsciously has been patriarchal with his wife, which she points out. So it's interesting how the whole notion of, patriarchy is so seeped in our consciousness through culture and society that we are constantly facing this kind of brunt of what is going on. And it is in this notion that you see the fact that the recognition of other people's lives as well, that this change should be brought about. A reflection in the male, at times the woefully toxic kind of husband of the lawyer who gets enraged. So you have different notions, and even amongst women, you have different levels of it. Then you have the casual insensitivity of men at large, where the husband says he feels bad, but he says shit happens, people move on. So, it's not made a difference to her. So you have all these dualities in gender as well. Dualities in the father, who is feminist for this daughter, but been patriarchal with his wife, which exist in all of us. Similarly, the mother who wants to tell the daughter to rebel, but tells her to bardasht karo, or the mother-in-law who comes up later, or the husband who is actually feeling bad but can't get around apologizing for what he did. So each character here in this film is a reflection of patriarchy in various ways. Much of it is about women who are conditioned to remain quietly at the receiving end of everyday patriarchy. Bardasht karna, as the character puts it. It's also about the casual insensitivity of men. But I want to emphasize here the insensitivity of men is unconscious, subconscious, half-conscious. It's not something that you choose to do. I'm not talking about a Nirbhaya rapist or the boys' locker room, which again, I will speak about as well. So there's a normalization of the male entitlement, which kind of holds a mirror to one and all. I want to share a small clip of a short film, which has been, which I want to source and say it's a powerful film by Mullen Lowey, London, for inspiring the future, kind of is the logo that they have. It provocatively captures early on how children define their career opportunities as male and female when asked to draw, and you'll see that yourself when I put this on.
This afternoon, we're going to draw people doing different jobs. And the first job we're going to draw is a firefighter.
Have a think in your head what a firefighter looks like.
What's your firefighter called?
Mine's called Firefighter Gary.
Firefighter Stan. Firefighter Simon. He's big and strong. He's got a big helmet on.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
Next, we're going to draw a surgeon.
Have you thought of a name for your surgeon?
Jim Bob.
Jim Bob.
He's a brain surgeon. I think he would wear a stethoscope. He gives you medicine.
That's his ambulance.
Okay, next, we're going to draw a fighter pilot.
This is his jet plane. He rescues people. He likes to do stunts in the air and stuff.
Okay, now who would like to meet these people for real?
Yeah! They're dressed up.
My name's Tamsin and I'm a surgeon in the NHS.
My name's Lauren and I'm a pilot in the Royal Air Force.
My name's Lucy. I'm a firefighter in the London Fire Brigade.
So who wants to know how to do an operation?
Who's put it on?
Try my stethoscope.
We put this in here.
What does it look like?
There you go. Now you're a proper fighter pilot.
So into your ears. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
It's really good. It's much better, yeah, it's much better than the kids' one.
So the reason I showed this was, one, to emphasize that it's not a South Asian or an Indian phenomena. It is something that world over we need to make that difference. And I think Archana's film is also drawn from the West. The fact that you have these little children, who spoke about, all men kind of having these professions, a firefighter, surgeon, or a fighter pilot. 61 pictures were drawn of men and only 5 were female in any of these professions. So we grow up with these mindsets constantly.
This afternoon.
What is it that it's leading to? Where you have male stereotypes which are independent, powerful, competent, logical, decision makers, breadwinners, leaders. All the notions of leadership are with the men, aggressive, consistent, protectors, and you have almost the opposite for women, stereotypes. I'm not saying we all are, but we need to recognize this in the way we think. The dependent, the weak, the incompetent, the emotional. Emotional is treated as a negative. Implementers, housekeepers, supporters, fearful, constantly fearful of, making decisions, and fickle, women are fickle. These have been stereotyped over a period of time. We need to really look at these in terms of, that whole notion of the woman being woman, Mrs., mistress, seamstress, pretty, bossy, frigid, frumpy, whining, pushy, shrill, all that is kind of female. The male is Mr., Sir, Master, Tailor, that whole thing, handsome, dominant, stoic, unkept, which is fine, complaining, loud, dad, aggressive, upset, all those notions, which could be women or any of these, if we kind of look at it from the larger perspective, could be any of us, irrespective of the sex or gender that we're looking at. But this is the way stereotyping happens. I want to emphasize here that this kind of stereotyping is also impacting men's lives in lots of ways, in ways in which they operate. And here we're looking at, before I go into the issue of masculinity, which is in terms of male sex roles, the breadwinner, the brave one, the one who doesn't cry, can't be emotional. So even before the liberation movement, literature in the male sex role had recognized the social nature of masculinity and possibilities of change in men's conduct. So you have a lot of literature on this, and now the whole notion of hegemonic masculinity and emphasized femininity, that these roles need to be within these straitjackets. So assigning these roles becomes an issue that we need to, look at. And in this, the fact that sex is associated with reproduction is always kind of glorified. So even in the Kali, that whole notion of Durga, that whole notion of taking care of, the notion of Devi and the change that brings about is part of that process. But the roles that are assigned are based on characteristics, stereotypes, ideologies, values in religion, in culture, beliefs and practices that we do are constantly very, very stereotypical. So we are looking at these stereotypical notions which make for something like the man who doesn't feel the pain. Ya mard ko dard nahi hota. That whole notion is constantly projected, which by any stretch of imagination is not true, but we take it as a given and we go along those yardsticks. He's the strong provider, the confident, the tough one, the aggressive one, the independent one. If you're not, you're also stereotyped there. So the man has to be that. And very often we see in families, you'll have an elder sister many years older with her little brother is sent to wherever she's going outside. If it's late, that little brother is ostensibly supposed to look after the sister. He might be petrified and hide behind her. But the psychology of that little boy, imagine what he grows up to be, is that he has to take care of his sister. That whole concept, the concept that we're looking at. But the psychology of the woman also is she has to be, take care of that younger brother, yet be under his shadow because he's taking care of her on the face of it. So we're living in this kind of a, protection syndrome that's constantly created, where you'll have, when we look at gender qualities in this larger scenario of things, we have the notion of, the kind-hearted being, more often than not, if we ask with a show of hands, being the woman, the aggressive one being the man, emotional one being the woman, and the strong one being the man again, so on and so forth. Whereas any of these qualities ostensibly can be of men or women. So when we stereotype, we give these qualities, and what happens to the male in this whole notion? And I want to move on from Thappad to another film, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, Kabir Singh. Now, Kabir Singh did a huge business, crores of business, the way it was. And I actually saw it in the hall to see what was so abhorrent about the film. It's really an obnoxious celebration of, masculinity at large that we are looking at, of toxic masculinity in various ways, where, the protagonist is a bully, he's an abuser of women, and he's lauded for it, People clap that this is his notion of love. He's insensitive, alcoholic. He mouths off to the dean, proprietarily stakes his claim on the girl and bullies anyone who comes in his path. He even slaps the heroine and he tells her, who knows you in college? Your identity is that you're my girl. That whole notion of toxic masculinity is we as parents, we through patriarchy, we in society and culture have created. I want to understand that whole notion of, why this happens. It's not something which is a conscious process. It is something that we've been grown up with. So it's perhaps one of the most misogynistic of the Indian films, but the identity, the fact that it did so well, the fact that all the CTs and the Talis came at times which were absolutely abhorrent, is worrisome at large that we need to look at. That's why the need for gender sensitization is so imperative today. Aggressive masculinity that it creates, that we take for granted, Even when Nirbhaya happened, a lot of our politicians said, boys will be boys. A lot of people just said that, and that whole notion of recognizing that as something which is a given is the worrisome thing. And this, that whole culture of this macho man which is created, of the broad chest, of not being a sissy, of not being, of being, having a loud voice, being dominating, being bossy. All this becomes something that one is aspiring for. You're not looking at, gentleman is not the new norm anymore. It's not, gentleman is seen like a sissy. And I want to take up the whole issue of the boys' locker room. I don't know how many of you were privy to what happened in Delhi, because this is a public school in Delhi, where young adolescent boys started a notion of what was a WhatsApp group called Boys' Locker Room. And that whole notion was, short of saying something like this, which is boys are like arrows. This is not show from the bow, but shot from the bow. Girls are like tissues, use and throw. So really that whole notion of, which is constantly imbibed in school children, and this is what in a sensitization workshop that we did with school children, which is one of the most important kind of notions that we really need to look at, because it's at that level that change needs to be brought about. So the boys' locker room was a reflection of how quickly in life can we start talking about sex and consent. Now, what they did was, the boys, there was a girls' locker room also. I won't get into that, but the fact that the boys, and there was one girl in this boys' locker room too, but they created this WhatsApp group, and their whole fantasy was having sex with women, with girls, because these were adolescent boys, and violent sex. It wasn't for pleasure. It was obviously something that had arrived. So in other words, they even spoke about raping the girl constantly. These were the kind of messages that were shared till somebody stood up, because they were trying to victimize their own classmates. So you have this notion of, we need to start talking about sex. At what age do we start speaking about it? About consent. Consent is so significant. About boundaries, about equality with children, about teenagers, young adults, how they grow. So if Nirbhaya was a glaring case of how juveniles become engaged in a repugnant kind of sexual violence, which very often we sitting here with all our intellectual pretensions say that that's like a semi-rural phenomena, that's a rural phenomena, and their upbringing is like that. What upbringing are we speaking about when we speak about, boys' locker room, public school boys, or for that matter, Mr. Pachauri of Terry, who, a Nobel Prize winner, shared a Nobel Prize, or Tarun Tejpal, who has a case against him, both of whom made statements to say that she was being provocative and encouraged me. And that is the same logic that I get when I'm taking a workshop, say, with the police. Constable level police, they will say, madam, wo chote kapde pehen ke aate hain, न्योता देते हैं वो harassment के लिए. I can understand that person saying it, but to have these ostensibly educated, emancipated, and are so well-known men saying it shows there's some problem in our education system, which we really need to make a change. There's some problem in the way we are dealing with all these notions, and how masculinity, notions of masculinity freely exist in the imagination of the youth, the young boys today. So it's not that little boy who's accompanying his sister for work or wherever because he's taking care of her. It's this whole psychology that it's create. He can't make a point of, cry or do anything. So it's this whole notion of a kind of, man who can never be the victim. There's emasculation involved, the initiation, suppressed emotions, which lead to violence. And that whole notion of be a man, can't you control your wife or your woman? That whole notion. What are we doing when we constantly say that? That's the worrisome, kind of notion that we are speaking about. So there are repressed emotions and sexuality there as well. Bigger and bigger idea of masculinity, shifting to a dominating kind of violence. Boys' locker room talks about let's rape her. This is their wishful fantasy. Connecting sex with violence, that's the worrisome thing. Not some kind of an orgasmic pleasure that happens hormonally. The problem is that the pleasure is coming from violence. It's not from the act itself. Masculinity is based on one person's pleasure, not both people's pleasure here. It doesn't consider the other person's pleasure. And it's a sadly misconceived reality today of sex being a one-way stream. that is something which constantly grows on issues of masculinity. So the gender-related expectations, and Funk and Herner have, picked this up in a big way with talking about the instrumental versus the expressive. The instrumental being the adventurous, the dominant, the forceful, the independent, the strong being the masculine type, and the expressive, sentimental, submissive, superstitious, feminine. This is the kind of expectation that gender expectation, and I'm only talking male and female at this point in time, that is brought into question. So we really need to make that difference and that change in a lot of ways. And we need to help to maintain that. Before I do this slide, we need to maintain that kind of, help to maintain gender hierarchy. This masculine type helps to maintain gender hierarchy by ensuring and reinforcing that men and boys are trained for behavior that keeps their status high, their power high, in terms of decision making, in terms of leadership, in terms of dominance, in terms of achievement orientation. This becomes something which is worrisome. Another worrisome thing is that girls are getting empowered today. We all know. We have Archana sitting there, Aparajita, a lot of people around. But somewhere along the lines, the boys also need to get empowered at that level. They cannot cope with the empowerment of women. And that is not something which is consciously there. It is something that you grow up with. So stricter laws and penalties cannot be the only way to keep women and girls safe. So we say, oh, we have great laws. We keep adding on more laws. While the safety of women and girls is a valid societal concern, we need to be equally concerned about what is happening to the men and boys in this changing world. Laws and punishment are perhaps necessary, but even though their deterrent value is today debatable. So we have the notions of, how we are looking at, is there a problem in the video, in the PowerPoint?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. Not at all.
Because I had the bandwidth changing or something which came up here. So I want to go on to something that I think Archana also picked up. So we have this whole notion of, in today's time, the fact that the new normal has been recalibrated and we are looking at a new world order. We are looking at the clueless man in the household who's stuck at home, doesn't know what to do. So, I'm not sympathizing. I'm just being empathetic to the issue because we need to understand where we are placed in this larger scenario. And in this scenario, women have limited access to social protection. So it's becoming and lots of cases of, domestic violence is coming up in a big way. Lots of this, even though work is also being shared in lots of ways. And I'm not talking about us at large, I'm talking about generally how it's happening. And I want to acknowledge feminism in India for the pictures that I've taken here. So you have men's lockdown anxiety. This needs to be thought of as well. That anxiety overshoots a whole lot of things. And there's something that we need to recognize, that the whole notion of masculinity is based on being the breadwinner, being the one who's working. But today we have times where that is a concern. Work is not available. We have students who are passing out their masters, PhDs, there's no work there. They're going at a much lower level to, actually aspire to be something else, and all the aspirations. And this is also part of, which is men and women both, but the lockdown anxiety for men perhaps comes up in a bigger way because they've grown or they've been brought up to be the breadwinners. So violence is not just a physical or a biological act that we are speaking about here. It is located in our social and cultural context. It is not just that, but there are other kinds of violence which we are constantly doing on an everyday life. I have about 5 minutes. Aparajita, if you're concerned about the time.
Please, ma'am, please go ahead. 5 minutes.
So we have descriptive and prescriptive gender stereotypes. And here we are talking about more than just descriptive, they are prescriptive, in which what should the men and women be like? What should they do? Unwritten but powerful rules of what ought to be done, how they need to conform to society's expectations about femininity and masculinity. This is a constant. So you have prescriptive masculine stereotypes, which are rigid, more rigid than the feminine. In fact, researchers have shown that it's an upsetting form of harassment for men when they are told that you're not man enough. That's also harassment. Boys and men react strongly to being referred to as gender deviant. The prescriptive feminine stereotypes safeguard hierarchy, with women assuming traditional supportive nurturing roles. And I want to emphasize here, patriarchy is perpetuated by women more than men. It's not just men they are recipients in a larger way. It's women as mothers, mothers-in-law, grandmothers who are perpetuating the notion of patriarchy. So in this larger scenario, we all of us today need to speak about cyberbullying because of the lockdown, because of the fact that we are housebound in a lot of ways. We need to speak about peer pressure, which leads to, challenging each other. Most importantly, we need to speak about consent. We need to talk about it. We need to understand that there are boundaries within which we need to be, but those boundaries do not have to be overriding somebody else's boundaries. And that's something that is a constant we are looking at. The pleasure of equal, not just consensual, and most importantly, welcome sex. Not, just saying that this is something that that is my need of the hour. So we need to talk about building these models of consent. And this is something we take for granted when we, see a film and we say, like the song, "Tu ha kar ya na kar, tu hai meri kiran." There's no notion of, do you have any say in this? And a lot of times my participants have told me, but ma'am, he was a psychopath. Then there are a lot of psychopaths in society. We have acid throwing. We have a lot of things where consent is just taken for granted. We need to build on those consent and not to imagine that it exists. And we have a lot of acts and laws in place, but we need to do so much more, because the law doesn't make, as we are trying to say, the law is only a deterrent to a certain extent. It's a bargaining chip. We need to have that change beyond that. I just don't want to end a session on gender by making it seem like it is a man-women thing. It is trans people as well, which is a third gender we need to look at. So it is this need to move beyond this binary, where the trans people are the most exploited in this whole notion of what they can do, what is their behavior, and roles that they need to, kind of apply. What are their entitlements? So you will expect a trans person to have certain, have certain activities or jobs in place, as that little video that I showed for men and women. So the whole notion of looking beyond the cisgender, which is cisgender is a person whose gender identity and expression matches the sex they were assigned at birth. So according to cisgender is according to the prescribed expectation of society and culture. So cisgender also enjoys privileges as their identity is treated as society's default gender identity. And if it is the default gender identity, it would not recognize other notions within it. And in this, looking beyond the gender binary, and this is just so we are clear that gender is not just men and women, it's sexual orientation, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, asexual, heterosexual, pansexual, I won't go into it, or their identity, which could be transgender, transsexual, transvestite, intersex, gender fluid, gender non-binary, and the list goes on. It's like the third generation of human rights. We have gendered systems, and spaces. Now, space is a very important kind of a feminist category, where they talk about space beyond physical space. And it's here that we're looking at how work is gendered. Men usually do the paid work outside the home, while women do paid work outside the home and unpaid work at home. Domestic work is seen as women's work. Political systems are gendered. Until recently, we had hard portfolios for men and soft portfolios for women. This government, through the two governments that they've formed, has actually had a finance minister and a defense minister who's a woman, which is a change. But generally, it's the soft portfolios that are given. Spaces are gendered. Where men predominate public spaces, women occupy the private space. Marketplace is male, kitchen is female, and so on and so forth. So we have a notion of the social space that patriarchal society creates is a kind of gendered socialization that happens, where the social reproduction of patriarchy and hegemonic masculinity, later leading to a kind of a toxic masculinity, leads to a lot of problems. And that's what we are all facing unconsciously, subconsciously, it's not something that's deliberate. So the problem here is not the gender difference. It's really the gender inequality. So the difference, the fact of, as I said right in the beginning when we did the gender-sex dichotomy, sex of the person is not the problem. It is gender which we create, which is a problem, which puts women, makes them unequal in a disadvantageous position vis-a-vis men. It even inequality puts men also in a disadvantageous position, and trans people are the most disadvantaged. So it's not something that we look at. And I want to, go around the circle of where we started, that it is experiencing this kind of cognitive dissonance and reflecting on this self-critically. And when we do that constantly, I have a trans person on a panel with me. I have to ask them, how do I address you? Because I don't know better. So very often we are in that kind of a situation where we need to deconstruct basically structures of work, profession, society, culture, all of the structures that we are looking at, need to deconstruct systems, need to deconstruct these systems which have inbuilt stereotypes in them, constant stereotypes. And Narchana gave some examples, Sir, who spoke right in the beginning, gave others. And need to deconstruct gender and construct that equality based on consent, not based on, any odd notion. This is my world of expectations, of do's and don'ts, of belonging, of relationships that are intimate, relationships that are demanding, that are compulsive and controlling. I need to deal with all these relationships. In the multiple roles and relationships that are pushing and pulling me, and I could be a man, woman, trans person, anybody, in many directions, I often lose touch with my being, my process of becoming, my search to discover equations in relationships and well-being. I often lose touch with my space, but most importantly, I often lose touch with my rhythm with the self. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you so much, Professor Dhar. Gender is indeed a spectrum, and also the problem is inequality and not gender. Before we go to the concluding part, ma'am, there is a question for you. They want to know. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
The question is with reference to the comment. It is about women are speaking for women. Men are also speaking for women. Who would speak for men? For instance, there is a celebrated case of gold smuggling in Kerala. I mean, you can see in the chart they have discussed a case where, according to them, it was a false sexual harassment case against a male officer while she worked for some government PSU. And the officer was transferred. So the whole thing has come out in the limelight now, and it is proved that it was a fabricated complaint. So what the officer is, the officer wants to know, like, what happens, who speaks for males in case of fabricated complaints or things getting exaggerated.
Okay. So very often I get this in a lot of sessions where they say that one, that women are women's greatest enemies. Second, that women file cases, false cases. And I want to say here, please treat the women as humans. So as men file false cases, so do women. That's, it could be anybody who's filing that false case. And there are instances of that. We have a lot of rules, we have a lot of acts under the IPC where men can take up issues and concerns, but this particular act of sexual harassment, Women at Workplace Act, is made for the women. The good thing about this act, and this is something that I don't know if it's there in any other act of the Government of India, is that there's a penalty for a false complaint. If it is proven that you have made a false complaint, it's a penalty that you as a complainant have to pay. But having said that, my experience of sexual harassment cases and cases where it's taken up as part of the committee has been that.
There is no such provision penalty under the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act. If there is a case of false complaint and all, there is no such provision.
There is a provision.
Yeah, this is duty to
it's like 50,000 rupees or something. It's not very much.
Not constituted the committee. It is the question of you have not constituted the committee.
No, it is for the false committee.
Then false complaints, because that liability is not on the women. Otherwise, people won't be encouraged to give any complaints if they are really victimized and all. So that kind of thing.
That I want to emphasize that women are actually victimized under this as well, because very often it's taken up.
That is why there is no question of false complaint and all, and that kind of doesn't exist. It is only a question of constitution of sexual harassment committee. That I don't see. I want to make submission. Thank you, ma'am.
I don't see anything wrong in there being a penalty for that, which is a good thing, because it's a deterrent for any kind of, the accusation that it's a false complaint. So I don't see any issue in that. But having said that, if we want to bring about that change, it is mindsets which have to change. And in that, whether you're standing up for the man or the woman, and as I said, we are constructing that man into the entity that he is as a society. So we have to bring about that change in different ways, in the way we deal with our boys and girls, actually, in larger sense of the term. So that has to, has to be brought about. But having a sexual harassment committee in place, again, is an issue that we need to look at in terms of the time and energy that goes into it, and the fact that the committee doesn't have any teeth. You can only give in your findings after doing the whole thing in a 90-day period. But after that, it's up to the administration in charge to take whatever decision that they do. And there are other channels. So the man is not victimized in that sense of the term. Whereas I find that women who have made the complaint are constantly victimized. We as a society do it. It's not a concern. It's a good initiative that it's come in, and it's a part offshoot of CDAW that we have the Sexual Harassment Act. But there are areas in which, we really need to look at in the operational context. Even there was this whole issue of hanging of the Nirbhaya thing, that how human are we to have capital punishment? So we'll always have two opinions on those kind of scores. But it's something that we need to, on an everyday basis, make a change.
Thank you, Dr. Dhar. There is one more question for you. Sensitization should be started at what stage in the organizations?
Any stage is good news to start it, but ordinarily, I think we should start it young, as we showed in that film, that 5 to 7 years is when the mindsets start getting formed. So then to unchange that becomes difficult. So we have to do that. But not only do we need sensitization programs, we need refresher courses on it, a constant reminder of how, after that cognitive dissonance, to experience and make that change in our habits. So at any stage, whenever you can start as early as possible, is good news. It's not something which should be, initially, I know that it seems like we know it all. We are not doing this. I've had people say that, oh, I have 3 daughters, so I'm very, very gender sensitive. I don't think it works like that. We need to understand that there are things that we are doing. My daughter would say you have a different yardstick for my brother and for me in a lot of ways. So I also rethink and say, okay, yeah, maybe I'm doing things in that way. So of course, there are other concerns, security concerns, and there are other concerns there. But we need to start as soon as we can and have it as a kind of experience sharing activity, because all of us would have said, and from the men as well, because the men also have been, are under this patriarchy, are supposed to stand up to a particular kind of a role model that they have. And that's the problem with women in positions of power. The role models are all male. So, we're constantly looking at the male role models, which again is a tall order, because then it becomes kind of masculine aping, which should not be, So, and it's not, I'm not talking about, it as a poetic license, as in "Bahut ladi mardani wo to jhansi wali lani thi." The one who was brave was also, fought like a man. But that aside, I think we need to do it at every stage whenever we can to make that change, because there are things we might be doing that we don't understand. The things which we are applauding might not be something that needs to be. The things we need to encourage our girls and boys and others around us to do will make a world of difference. See it in ourselves, in habits that we've formed. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Dhar. Indeed, gender sensitization is a balancing act. We have to ensure equal participation of women, men, and all other sexes in decision making, creating a welcoming and supportive environment for all. Also, we have to ensure that opportunities and life changes are neither dependent nor constrained by the person's gender. I thank you again, ma'am, for your enriching and enlightening presentation. Now, I would request additional CGCA, Shri G. Kitchen, to address us all in his concluding note. Chin, sir.
Yeah. That we are able to have such a online conference with all such dignitaries present in the conference. I thank each and every one of you. I was supposed to say a word of thanks, but I would like to sum up in a few words also. So give me some time, Aparajita. It's so nice to be a participant here as well as organizing this conferencing. I'll scramble it up, and I believe each and every one of us will be able to understand the way I want to express my views on this issue. I'll give my thanks on behalf of CGCA, officers and staff. We have been running around, and the IT cell, so that this conference is without any technical hitch. I also thank all the participants, participants like principal CCAs, our DOT officers, officers on deputation. It is so nice to see all of us having come together and could relate to one another face to face. Thank you to all of you. Aparajita, I am so thankful to you. It is the first time I heard your comparing this meeting. Rather, we say it in other words also. It's so nice that you have done so well in time and have commented and have asked the questions that are supposed to be asked by us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
I thank our member finance, who is always available with us whenever we require. We're so happy to have him every time, every association, every meet. He is always available to us. That is one leadership that we need to, as one of the proceedings of the meeting. And he has given us a very big insight into the old history of different theories coming up. Ultimately, he pointed out on the equality. I have seen Sir itself for the last so many years that he has no differences between a male or a female. I congratulated Sir on this issue and wish him a very good future. His guidance in the coming days. His examples are basically based on the present management system. That is what is required for all of us. Examples are plenty. We would like to replicate in one of these days. Now coming to Archana. Dr. Archana, as I know her already for so many years, is a good speaker. She continues to be a good speaker. We're so happy to have her, and it is always interesting to hear her speech and her presentations. All the examples that she was giving real life situations, the car parking problems, the cranky baby, and the what do you call the video, gender bias. Apart from all these issues, her real life experiences really give us a new insight into the problems our ladies are facing, our women are facing in the workplace. I will not be able to elaborate more. I'll come down one by one again. Dr. James, I'm so happy personally to see you in your face. I'm always interested personally to hear a professor or an academician speak in front of us. There is an example we're saying that after becoming an officer in the government of India or a bureaucrat, all our good English are gone, and it is not very pleasing for the people to hear when we speak. Like one of my old professors, he was MA literature in 1960s, and normally MA literatures were good in speaking and writing. So after 30 years, he was a politician also. Students' Union went to request him to give a representation, to write a representation to the CM. Then he said, you know, my dear boys, all my good languages are gone. Either I say you go or come or so like that, all of us, all the note sheet type of languages we are always experiencing day to day. Therefore, it is very difficult, especially boys, to have a very good words and speech and very pleasing words for the hearers. Forgive us for that. You have given us a detailed account of the gender issue, the subject, the insights from the beginning till the end. I have no comments on any comment on any topic that any subhead that you are giving. You have analyzed so nicely about patriarchy, masculinity. All these are inherent in society. Time immemorial. So this has given us a real academic interest, academic knowledge, and which you are relating to the present scenario in the country, in the international level or national level, which gives us a very good insight into what gender equality or the reality is as of today. Personally, I'm very much enlightened. I hope all of us are enlightened very much on this presentation and your speech and your examples of the films and all. It's so nice that really, we need academicians to talk to us, to help us, to give us insight of the topics that are on discussions. I believe this has become a very, very big issue now, very big topic. Perhaps our officers may be willing to have another workshop or 1 day, 2 day workshop had pandemic not been there. So we'd like to be in touch with you, and thanks to you for all the lectures that you have given us. Last but not the least, I would like to comment on 2-3 items. Number one is, from time immemorial, ladies are playing very, very pivotal role in history, in polity, in religion, in all spheres of activities. Now, in reality, ladies are very, very much dedicated. Women are dedicated to the job they are assigned. I will give you one example. A husband and a wife, they have one child. They divorce. The wife takes care of the child till the child grows, till the child becomes major. She, or in her own life, looks after the child till her death. She doesn't bother about remarriage. She doesn't bother about anything. They can leave. Whereas a man, vice versa, when they divorce, immediately, normally they marry again. Because this shows that men cannot live alone, but ladies can live alone. That shows their dedication to the family, their dedication to the children, their dedication to the society. So is the dedication to the organization wherever they're posted. And when you talk about male patriarchy, or we call it nowadays male chauvinism, you have given us, Dr. James, very good insight into this, enlightening, educative. Second, the proportion of women, or we call it female, or the weaker section, in the society in terms of education, in terms of employment, or any activity is very low, as we know. As we have seen in the presentation, especially Archana has given us very good insight. But of late, we have seen that in this pandemic environment, 8 lady country heads have done much more better than 8 male country heads, which shows that they are equally competent, they are equally, they can perform equally better than men. In most cases, in these 8 cases also. So there is no point where there should not be inequality. Unfortunately, during this pandemic again, we have seen in papers, we have heard that there are cases of domestic violence, which is very, very unbecoming of us at this stage in 1920s. Therefore, men also has to be sensitized. So this subject has become very, very relevant, even for educated fellows. I was surprised when very highly technocrats are creating domestic violence, saying that I'm a stronger man, so I can slap my wife. Had the wife been a kung fu expert or karate expert, he would have gotten, he would have been beaten black and blue. Just because you're a male doesn't mean that you are always superior. So anyway, the inequality has to be seen in a new perspective. Archana has told categorically to speak up to all these ladies, all the women. It's very true. We have seen recently, in the recent past, Me Too movement. This Me Too movement has brought into limelight what harassment, what kind of problems they are facing. Now they speak it up. It is a kind of a movement which brought out the inequalities of treatment, the inequalities of pay structure, inequalities of social degradations, social differentiations. So in the present age, as of today, people have come up, and this needs further push. Equality is the main thing that we are focusing on this issue. There are always differences between a man and a woman. So basically, we have to promote this. That is why this Me Too movement and others are also promoting. Of late, our government also is so good. I appreciate the government's activities where they recruited army ladies, lady officers in the army. Commission officers are now permitted in ladies, which was not before. In paramilitary services, these differences have been eliminated to very much degree, to a high degree, which is very good activity of the government of India. Our respected member has told in the last word, honesty begins at home. We have been discussing when to start this gender sensitizing. We said 5 to 7 years. I believe that is the right age. Honesty begins at home. If the family, if this started from the home, when a child or when a boy or a girl grows up, go to school, go to high school, go to college, what have they learned in the family will really extend to the environment where they are and where they are working or where they are studying. That is one which is very good objective that we are supposed to pursue. I will not say much more. I think time is out. I'm so happy to each and every one of you. Again, for my last, since all of you have seen a video type, I also have seen sometimes, Hindi movies. I don't see much Hindi movies. I saw one Salman Khan Hindi movie. I don't remember also just now. My mind slips. 3 years back, because I don't see all of his films also. I know their success stories are there. I read in paper. In that film, I happened to see he was doing a very good job. He told to 3 people, 2 people, so that the other 3 people also will tell another 3 people. One person will tell another 3 people, so that it will extend to thousands and thousands of people. It will affect thousands of people in the good work that he was doing. So like this, I believe all our participants here, majority are men. So let us try to tell all these gender sensitization to 3 of our friends, and tell them each one of them to tell to another 3 people. Let us try to take this example also. Thank you very much, and wish you the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chin sir, for your extremely descriptive concluding note. And you are right, sir, rightly said by you that a person's home is the first school, and it is the first step where a child can take towards sensitization. I would like to inform you, sir, and all the participants that this is first in the series of webinars which DOT Training Finance, along with Office of CGCA, is organizing. I would suggest suggestions from all the participants, my seniors and officers, what kind of topics they would like us to touch upon, because during COVID times, this is the only way through which all of us can remain connected with each other. We can have joint discussions on the topics of relevance in the current scenario. I thank all my seniors.
Parajita?
Yes.
I just want to appreciate the efforts of, you're really walking the talk by taking up these kind of topics in the Department of Telecommunications. It's truly communication, and I think I can see there's already a multiplier effect, and this is a very empowered kind of participants. But amazing summing up by Sir before this. And I think putting all that together, we can already see a change. So thank you all I'm truly humbled for making me a part of it.
Thank you, Professor James, Professor Dhar. Thank you so much. DOPT, which is Department of Personnel and Training, time and again write to all the departments to organize such kind of events. So I'm sure in the future also we will have discussions on these lines. Maybe the topics could be of relevance according to the times. So I thank Member Finance, I thank Advisor Finance, I thank Additional CGCA, and the entire team of CGCA and DOT, which worked behind the scenes. Arvind, Swati, of course, Sanjay Kumar sir. Silently, they all have worked behind the scenes to make it a success. Also, I would like to tell all of you that we had almost 70 participants on and off. Only 17% of the participants were women participants. And there are certain suggestions which we have in the chat and on privately also. Mr. Kamal Kapoor, Dr. Kamal Kapoor has mentioned, though he has mentioned privately, but it's a very good suggestion that there should be a column in the appraisal reports of the officers regarding attitude towards women. So this is a very welcoming suggestion, sir. I'm sure our establishment we will definitely forward it to our establishment and they can take it up from DOPT. Also, Geraldine Shabong, CCA Assam has written that government has been trying hard to enable this concept, and it is up to us to ensure that these policies are not just on paper but are actually active. And quite a few of my junior lady officers have written privately, I cannot name them, that they have DOT and CGCA for organizing this webinar, very much needed for all of us. So I thank Member Finance and Additional CGCA and CGCA Office for encouraging us to organize this webinar, and I hope we have many more coming in the near future. Thank you, Professor James, and thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ash. Leave the meeting. Thanks.